wondering for you and Matthew, have you responded the same way to these different events? Do you have sort of patterns that you fall into? Lisa grieves like this, Matt grieves like this, or has it changed as you have grown in your marriage? How does your marriage sort of overlap with your individual responses to grief through those different events?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Because you're right about, like, with Avonlea, there was the initial event that, that's an obvious grief. And then there's this ongoing grief of what could have been and what should have been. And over the years, I think because we have really purposed to try to learn and grow together and kind of, and separately as well, individually, that in grief, there's times where we're grieving together. There's times when we just hold each other and cry because of maybe Avonlea would express, like, will I ever get married? And, and that just breaks her heart because she's got this little girl's heart, and we can both just grieve over that loss. But there are other times where each of us something will trigger us, and just allowing that other person to have their trigger, I think, is really important. Not to say, oh, I feel that too, or, oh, you know what I was thinking, which is kind of a natural tendency, I think, for humanly speaking, to do that, but to really just put all aside, even my feelings for that moment, and just listen and be there for the other person, and vice versa, so that there's a time for each of us to be held, to be just to sit with them in their grief. And so there's both, and said, trying to share everything realistic, because we tend to take turns and have different ways of expressing that grief, even. Even, and sometimes I see that go ahead.
No, finish.
Just sometimes stereotypically, sometimes Matt will respond in anger, like not, well, I don't know if that's quite the right word, but frustrated that she can't do this, or that this is being deprived from her, or something like that. And I, the part of me goes, well, let's just talk about that, or, well, that's not reasonable. Like, I want to reason with him instead of realizing, now, when I just have tears over something that I'm sad about, he gets to just let me do that. And so I need to recognize that sometimes that frustration is his grief, and that's how it shows itself. And it's not bad or wrong or to be reasoned with, any more than I want to be reasoned with when I'm going to have a good cry over something. So I just want to be listened to for now, and then we can sort it out later if there's some, bringing in some reasoning. So yes,
I mean, for me, one of the most revolutionary things I feel like I've learned as an adult is that my anger is often masking sadness or disappointment or insecurity, or, it took me a long time to realize that anger is really, really helpful if I use it to be curious and try to figure out what's underneath. But I never saw that before. I saw anger as just its own category instead of an entry level, thing. So that's really helped me. I wonder, Lisa, just talking about the different ways that you've approached grief, or even when Matthew is angry and you realize that, oh, he doesn't need to be reasoned with right now. He needs someone to listen. How have you learned, or how do you discern, we do often want to share how we feel, because that helps us feel like we're entering into someone's pain and that we can identify with it. So if we verbalize our own, that's kind of showing that we can identify with it. But how do we discern when that's helpful and when it's actually more helpful to leave our own pain out of it and just make space for them? Can you give us a 1, 2, 3 formula, please?
Oh, absolutely. There's this great 3-step program. Just kidding. No, but I do think just being mindful, studying your person, so how he is and how he reacts. So, and then just letting him have his time before you enter in and go, yes, I also know what that feels like, even though maybe it looks differently with me, but never right in that moment, just to giving him that space. And sometimes I might do it right in that same hour, but other times even going back that night or even several days later, coming back around and going, do you remember how you were really upset about this? And I wanted to talk a little bit more about that. And because now he's in a better place, right? Or even able to himself. I said, I want you to know that I also, in my own way, struggle with that or grieve over that. And then have the conversation there. And sometimes that just takes that self-control of the person too, to be able to go, this is not my moment right now. I want him to be fully heard and understood.
Yeah. I love that. One of the things that I read in your book, 100 Ways to Love Your Husband, one of the things that you had mentioned was differentiating between your wants and your needs. And I think that is such a tricky one because obviously needs are incredibly important, and so are desires, and so are wants. How do you differentiate between needs and wants in that place of grief? I need you to be like this versus I want you to respond like this. Have you found that to be a tension, or how do you even in your own self learn to differentiate what your wants are and what your needs are, and when your wants warrant sort of, really making them known because they're important too, your desires?
I think communication obviously is the most important thing you can do in terms of communicating what it is and saying, I just want you to know that this is something I really desire. Let's just say, it's easier almost to use a concrete example. Let's just say I really desire a chance for you and I to get away together so we can spend some time away from the kids, the needs. And I feel like we need this. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a need, want, which is it, will I live without, a 3-day? Probably. But I want to be mindful of not demanding that. Like this is, meet this need or else. So that would be the kind of thing where I'd want to really think through first before I lay it out there, and then be able to explain why it is I feel needful. I feel it's needful for me and for both of us together, mm-hmm. and give him a chance to think about that and decide, well, I just think right now is not a good time. Maybe financially, maybe our kids are not in a good place for us to leave them at this time, and have it be a real conversation rather than drawing a line in this, in the sand, so to speak, and just saying, and there are times where I will be very insistent. So don't get me wrong. I'm definitely no pushover when it comes to stuff like this, because I might say, I do think we need this. I don't think just I need this. You need this too. You just don't realize that you need this. Mm-hmm. And over the years, we've gotten, so he really respects me in these sorts of things. And he recognizes that, you are more in tune with our hearts than I am. And once we do get away in this situation, then he'll turn to me and goes, you know what, this was really good. I'm like, yes, it was. Yeah. So, and I think when you're in grief, you have to be very sensitive to each other in those things, because you notice when you're in grief, everything is so hard. I feel like just going through the daily motions of the day is demanding. And so to have someone else that you love and care about put one more demand on you can just blow things up unnecessarily. So I think we need to really kind of tiptoe around each other, as well as, or not tiptoe, that's not the right word, give each other grace to not overload the other person with demands. They're just not in a place to maybe meet, or at least present it in a way that gives them some room to sort it out for themselves.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think what you suggested there, even talking about, this is my desire and I feel like I need this, mm-hmm. And then opening the door for a response, rather than just going, I need this. It's a demand, it's an ultimatum. But it's that whole concept of leaving the door open for some dialogue or negotiation or reasoning, wisdom, all of that. So that's really helpful. Lisa, what would be, and it's hard to talk about this without being prescriptive. And I know that's not what you would want. It's not what I want, because marriage, there's nothing prescriptive about relationships. But for you and Matthew, as you have weathered, some significant challenges and significant seasons of grief and loss, What have been, sort of in a practical way, what have been some of the things you've mentioned? Communication. What have been other ways that you've learned to nurture your marriage, love one another through those harder seasons?
That's a good question too. When Avalon was first born, one of the things that happened during those first few weeks, I don't know why they felt so insistent on doing this early on, but the head of the NICU came to us and he said, just want you to know that the divorce rate for parents of a child like this is like 88%. And I just thought you should be prepared, for that. I thought, oh, that's so not helpful.
Wow.
Thank you. I just had this other loss that I feel like you're handing me this,
Yeah.
And then there's going to be another loss to follow. And although the Lord used it in a good way, because for me, I just thought, oh, I am not letting that happen. So I took it as a warning in a good way, even though I don't know what he was thinking when he told me that.
Yeah.
But I just thought, I do not want that to happen. So I want to make sure that we nurture one another through this, and we don't become one of those statistics, by God's grace. And so when you're in grief, as we talked about, it's just so hard to get through the basics of the day because your heart's so heavy and everything is so hard. And so to love one another in marriage, just those little things really do add up. Because you're probably not up for a big, heavy, long conversation. You're not really in the mood to do a big romantic getaway. But there's these little ways of connecting each day. So I'm going to give you some examples. Things like, I just think of recently when Matt's dad passed, and there was just so much sadness there, and just walking by Matt.